Hello and welcome to an Excel lesson with Rick Henderson. Today we're going to be talking about using worksheet functions inside VBA. I'm going to first take a look at my worksheet that I've got an example here. I've got employee information about some sort of score that they would have taken. So I've already set up the spreadsheet ahead of time with different data and named ranges. So I've got this named range called scores, and I'm going to calculate the average of all these scores here in this box. That is called the average score. That's its name. And you can see that I've used table styles to format that as the output style because I'm going to use VBA code to automatically calculate those averages, but I'm going to be using the Excel function called average. Now if you're not familiar with Excel, I would be able to type in the word average, and that's the average function. And even though it says I'm looking for a set of numbers separated by commas, I can select all of the values and hit the round brackets, and you can see that it actually takes in the name of the range. So I'm going to leave it that way and hit enter, and I get 82.44. Now I've actually played with that earlier by setting the proper number format and the decimal places. That's why it looks nice. But I'm going to get rid of that. I'm going to use it. I could of course use the exact same way. I could type in average and actually just type in scores, and that would be great, and that's everything I need to know, and I'll still get the same. So I'm going to clear that out, and we're going to calculate it using our functions, or using worksheet functions in Excel VBA. So I'm going to go into the code window, and you can see that I've got an example up here. So let's just take a look at the Project Explorer on the left. You can see that I've got two worksheets, and I've set the code name of these worksheets to be a little bit different than the actual name on the bottom of the Worksheet tab. So I look down at the properties for this worksheet called score data. I see in round brackets its name is score data. That's called its code name. And we look a little bit further down, we see the name called data, and that's the name that the user could change in Excel itself. I also have another one called the intro. I was just using that as the intro part of the video. And we have a module. So I can, after I've gone to insert module, I can then rename the module just by using the name option here again, where it used to say module 1. And I'm going to call it the name of, there's something descriptive of the code that I'm using there. Now one thing you should be aware of, warning number 1, is that I cannot have a subroutine called using worksheet functions. So you can't have a subroutine with the same name as your module. A lot of people run into that problem, but just remember that you can't do that. So here I've got this example of a small sub demonstrating the use of Excel worksheet functions in VBA. So the comment code, comment line starts with an apostrophe, and up at the top we're using option explicit. So we have to put that up at the top so that we are forcing, or the computer is going to be forcing us to explicitly declare our variables as a specific data type. So I've got this section here called declare variables. I like to make that stand out. We like to declare the variables at the top of a subroutine. Even though you could declare variables anywhere in a subroutine or program, it's commonly used standard. It's a common standard. Declare them at the beginning. That way later on when you're working through other code, you don't have to worry about having them declared, or you can see right at the beginning all the different types of variables that you'll be working with. So we have a range for the output, so that's going to be where the result is. That'll actually be our average cell. And then we have our range called scores. We have a variable that'll point to the worksheet itself, which in this case, because I'm using score data, it might not look like it does a lot, but at least it makes our code a little more simple and consistent. And then finally we've got a double variable to store the average score. So I have a set of numbers between 1 and 100, but if I average it, even though those are integers in this case, it is possible that when I average it, I'm going to get a decimal. So you got to think ahead a little bit in creating your variables and declaring them. And of course Excel will do some conversion for you, but you want to try to avoid having computers do type conversion because it adds to overhead and memory usage. So we've got our variables, and because all of the variables that we're using except for the average score, these are all object variables, and this average score as double is actually a primitive, sort of a primitive data type in Excel. What I'm going to end up doing is I have to use the set command with object variables. So I've used set, then the name of the worksheet, the worksheet variable is going to be equal to score data. Now, if I hadn't used the worksheet name, I would have to do something like this. Worksheets. So from the worksheets collection, use the one called data. So data is the name of the worksheet in quotation marks. If I put the name score data in quotation marks, that won't work because it's not the name of the worksheet, it's the code name. And writing it like this gives me a mismatch error because you can't put a worksheet object inside the worksheets collection. So you actually have to just do it like this. Now I set our range scores to be from the worksheet object. I give it the range object. So the range called scores from the WKS data object. And I'm also going to set the output to be the average score from the data worksheet. So hopefully everybody's clear on what all this does. Again, we're using proper comments to explain our code. Then we're going to get the average. Here's exactly what I wanted to talk about. This is how we use the function of Excel inside our subroutine. So I don't have to, at this point in my code, or in this point in the lesson, I don't have to write a loop and go through all the values in the row, or each row in a column, and then add up the number of scores and find out how many there were and add them all together, then divide by the number. I don't have to do that because the function for averaging is built into Excel. We're going to use the power of Excel as often as possible. So we can see that there's a command called WorksheetFunction. It's actually an object. So I can type WorksheetFunction. It's part of the application object. It's a member of the application object. And as soon as I press period, you'll now see a list of all of the Excel functions that I can use directly from VBA code. So all of this clears up so much work you don't have to do as a programmer. All this stuff is already done. Look, replace fields, replace functions, XORs, transposing random values between. You might know that function. So it's very, very useful, and we're just jumping to average, and there's average, deviation, and average, and that's exactly what I did. When I hit round bracket, of course I can select up to 30, probably more arguments, but I'm just going to give it the range of values. So range scores points to all of the values that I want to take the average of. So that takes all the work out of me having to write an equation called average. Now that the worksheet function for average is going to calculate the average of all those scores, then it assigns it or returns the value and stores it in the variable called double average score. So now double average score, I'm just going to call it average score, which is of type double. Average score now has the value that I want, so I'm going to output it as the value to our output cell. So our output range, and that's what this does. Say that the output.value is going to be equal to our average score. So I'm just going to go half screen here, or split screen. And here's how I'm demonstrating my split screen. Remember that you can take your title bar of your application, and if you pick it up and you move it to the edge of your monitor window, and as soon as your mouse pointer hits the edge, it's going to go half screen. And now that I've got Windows 10, I can choose which one I want to be the other half of the screen. Just click on Excel and it pops into place. So this is great actually. On this side here, I can run the subroutine by clicking the run button at the top, or now I can just press F5 on the keyboard and I get my result automatically placed into the average cell or the output range. So that's really good. There is a couple of things you need to know about the worksheet functions, and that's if you're going to be using any sort of worksheet function that already exists in VBA. So there's a library called math in the math library in VBA. That's usually, these are older commands that come from the original basic language. You'll see that I can't use things like the rand function from Excel, and I can do that by, I'm just going to go, I can't compile it, I was already compiling it, but I can run it, and I see that the object doesn't support this property or method. So I hit debug, and this line worksheet function doesn't support .rand, so I can't use that. So I'm going to click here for the reset button, come out of break mode, so I'm no longer in break mode, but I can comment this line out. that means it won't try to run at all. Now I'm going to run it again, and I see that, oh, I get the same kind of error and debug, and it's this yellow line. So I'm going to, every time I get the yellow line for debugging, it says that square root is equal to 0, because this function here doesn't seem to return anything. I'm going to hit reset or control break to get out of that. It's because this command, square root, already exists in VBA, so I can't do that at all. And there's a couple of, well, the reason is those functions already exist in a different way with a different name inside VBA. So I can't use the Excel square root function, but what I can do is this. So the random function is actually just R&D, so that'll work. So you can see that it takes a number as a single, so this is some kind of seed. The seed value, and you'll get random numbers. Not really going to go into random numbers right now, but it is kind of useful to know about these. And this one is the square root function, and that should work fine. Round bracket, give it a value. Now this should run without any problem. It's going to overwrite the value twice. Oh, no, square root not recognized either. And there you have it. That's how we can use the worksheet function object to get worksheet functions from Excel inside of our subroutines for VBA. Thank you very much, and hope you enjoyed the video.